If D-Day failed, Europe could have stayed Nazi for years. More than 156,000 Allied troops hit Normandy that morning. If the beachheads never held, the entire plan cracked open. 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, one narrow window, one weather call, one brutal race to get men, tanks, fuel, and ammo onto French soil before Germany locked the door again. And the door was real. German bunkers sat above the beaches. Machine guns covered the sand. Minefields waited under the water. Rommel had spent months turning Normandy into a trap. So the Allies were not gambling on courage alone. They were gambling on timing, weather, confusion, and German mistakes. No clean link-up with the forces pushing from the east. The war in Europe turns into a grind again, and grinds cost time. Time costs lives. Think of it like trying to flood a city through one broken fire hose. If that hose snaps, the pressure does not disappear. It backs up. It builds. It finds another route. That is what failure at Normandy could have done to the whole war. First, Germany gets breathing room. Every extra week lets them move troops, repair defenses, and punish occupied countries harder. Resistance groups in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway would face more arrests, more executions, more fear. That means the post-war map shifts eastward. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, maybe even parts of Germany itself could fall deeper under Soviet control. That single delay could reshape the Cold War before it starts. Western Europe weakens. Soviet influence grows. The Iron Curtain may land farther west than it did in our timeline. And then there is the bomb. If the war in Europe keeps dragging, the United States faces a nightmare choice. That was not science fiction in 1944. It was a real pressure point inside Allied planning. Think about that for a second. One failed landing on a French beach could have pushed the world toward a nuclear strike on the continent that started the war. The Nazis would not need to win forever. They would only need to survive long enough for the Allies to fracture, for Soviet power to spread, and for public patience to break. History does not always turn on grand speeches. Sometimes it turns on fog, tides, and 30 minutes of chaos. It gets trapped in a longer war, a redrawn map, and a much darker nuclear age. That is the real secret hidden inside Normandy. Omaha Beach fell on June 6, 1944. Not after days, not after weeks. In the first hour, the ramps dropped, and the beach became a trap. German bunkers were still alive after the bombardment, and the first waves got pinned on the waterline. That's the part people miss. They pictured D-Day as one huge, clean victory. It was not clean, it was a mess. Smoke, wrecked landing craft, broken radios, men trying to run uphill through fire. By 6:30 a.m., the beach was already choking. The tide kept rising. Dead craft blocked the shore. Medics dragged men through surf that turned red fast, and the Germans knew it. Inside reinforced bunkers, commanders saw the invasion stalling. Their guns were still working. Their reports were simple. Landing zones blocked. Heavy casualties. No breakthrough. Now the question changes. If Omaha fails, does D-Day fail with it? Aboard the command ships, officers kept reading worse messages. General Omar Bradley watched the reports stack up. One officer asked if the second wave should go in. Bradley said they had no choice. That line matters, because once the first wave is stuck, every choice gets ugly. Send more men, and you feed the fire. Pull back, and the entire invasion starts cracking. Think of it like a fire exit jammed by the first crowd. The people behind them can't see the blockage, so they keep pushing forward anyway. Above the beach, Allied aircraft fought their own battle. Clouds hid targets. Bombs missed more bunkers than they hit. German artillery kept firing. The air was too messy for precision, and the ground offered almost no cover. By late morning, the beach looked finished. Destroyed landing craft sat twisted in the surf. Wounded soldiers lay behind steel obstacles. Some units never made it past the water. Others kept moving because stopping meant dying where they stood. And here's where the alternate timeline gets ugly. German reinforcements arrive on time. Not late, not confused, on time. Armored divisions roll toward Normandy while the beach is still collapsing. That changes everything, because the invasion was never just about one shoreline. It was about whether the Allies could build a foothold before Germany reacted. By early afternoon, the worst question reaches headquarters. Should Operation Overlord be abandoned? No one wants to say it out loud, because if they withdraw now, a second invasion might not happen for years. Maybe never. The whole war bends around that single decision. Then the German side gets its own surge of confidence. Reports reach the wolf's lair. Optimism spreads. Orders go out to drive the invaders back into the sea. That phrase sounds simple. It was not. It meant Europe could stay locked in place. And then comes the retreat. As evening approaches, the order finally goes out. Units still afloat cover the evacuation. Some troops get out. Thousands do not. Burning landing craft drift across the channel. Omaha Beach stays in German hands. That's the real nightmare of this timeline. Not just the failure itself, the delay. Because if D-Day fails on Omaha, the war does not end where history says it should. It stretches, it drags, and every month it drags, more people pay for it. The guns went quiet that night. Smoke moved over Normandy. And across occupied Europe, millions kept waiting for freedom that never came on time. That's the part that hits hardest. One beach can change a year. One failed landing can change a generation. So if you ever think history turns on giant speeches or giant armies, remember this instead. Sometimes it turns on one shoreline, one bad hour, and one order that came too late. Thousands were dead, wounded, or missing. The fleet pulled back, and Allied leaders faced the worst day of the war. London got the report first. Churchill read it after dawn. The maps were still on the walls. The red arrows still pointed toward Normandy. But those arrows now pointed at a grave mistake. One advisor asked what they were supposed to tell the public. No one had an answer. There was no clean speech for a disaster that big. In Washington, Franklin the 500th, Roosevelt read the casualty counts. Thousands killed, thousands wounded, thousands missing. Then he closed the folder and said the line that mattered. We have to find another way. That's the part history books skip past. When a giant plan collapses, you do not get drama. You get math. Ships lost, men dead, time gone. Every hour the Allies failed to push inland. German patrols got bolder. Every delayed uprising cost more lives. Hope did not vanish all at once. It thinned out, day by day. For the first time in months, a lot of Germans thought the war might still be winnable. That mattered. A failed invasion does not just kill soldiers. It buys the enemy time to breathe, regroup, and believe. Soviet commanders watched the collapse in the West and understood the opening it created. If Germany finally fell, the Soviets might be the only army close enough to reach Berlin first. That single failed landing did not just delay liberation, it changed who would shape post-war Europe. Back in England, the factories went into overdrive. Shipyards worked day and night. New landing craft, new tanks, new aircraft. The Allies would try again, but not soon. It would take months, maybe another year. Germany had gained the one thing it needed most: time. Normandy was silent that morning. But the silence did not mean the story was over. It meant the cost had just moved somewhere else. And that's why D-Day was not only a battle, it was a turning point that failed, then forced the world to change around it. If you replay one event in your head, replay that one. By 1944, winning the war stopped being the only goal. The front lines looked nothing like the old maps people remembered. In the West, the Allies were still stuck across the English Channel. In the East, the Red Army kept moving. Week by week, Soviet troops got closer to Berlin. That shift mattered more than most people realize. Germany had poured almost everything into the Eastern Front. Thousands of tanks. It became a race, not just to beat Germany, to decide who would enter its capital first. And that race changed the plans in London. After the first invasion failed, a second crossing of the Channel looked brutal. More ships, more planes, more troops, more time. The Atlantic Wall was getting stronger every month. Germany kept adding guns, mines, concrete, and troops. The longer the Allies waited, the worse the landing looked. Meanwhile, in the United States, factories were running non-stop. Bomber frames came off assembly lines. Tanks rolled out. Landing craft filled ports. Whole cities had become war machines. But even with all that production, one question kept coming back. Should they risk another invasion or find another way to end this? The West had stabilized for now, but the East was breaking apart. One German general put it in plain words. They had stopped one invasion, but they could not stop an entire continent. That line tells you everything. Because by then, Germany's biggest fear was no longer the West. It was the Red Army. Moscow saw the opening too. If the Western Allies stayed out longer, Soviet forces could take far more ground before the war ended. That meant more cities, more borders, more influence after the guns went quiet. The future of Europe was no longer waiting in a conference room. Hidden labs, locked gates, no public hints. The atomic bomb was no longer a rumor by 1945. It was a shadow over every plan. Think of the war like a train collision that already happened. But 3 people are still fighting over the steering wheel. One wants Berlin from the west. One wants it from the east. The Allies could try another landing. The Soviets could reach Berlin alone. Or the new weapon could change everything before either army got there. And that's the part people miss. The end of World War II was not one finish line. It was a stack of decisions made under pressure, with Europe's future hanging on timing, not just who won, who arrived first, and who got to redraw the map. Different decisions than the ones we remember. But just as important, one failed invasion changed the map of Europe for decades. Stop. Picture May 1945. Berlin is gone. Smoke still climbs from the ruins, but in this timeline, only one army gets there first. The Red Army enters alone, no Western troops from the West. No race across Germany. No split city, no divided occupation zones. That one difference changes everything after the guns go quiet. By the time the leaders meet weeks later, the talks are not equal. The Soviet Union liberated most of Central Europe almost alone, and now it holds the stronger hand. When maps hit the table, borders stop being lines. They become pressure. Whole governments get replaced. School books change. Police change. Flags change. Millions of people awoke in a Europe very different from the one we know today. The failed invasion of Normandy had reshaped the balance of power. Washington now faced a continent where Soviet influence was stronger than ever before. The Cold War did not begin with equal rivals. It began with one side holding far more territory. The part people forget is how normal life keeps moving. Children still go to school. Factories reopen. Streets get cleared. Bread gets baked. The map on the classroom wall no longer matches the stories their parents tell at dinner. Then the race moves again, not back to beaches, into labs, rocket programs, nuclear research, jet aircraft, computers. Every discovery now carried the shadow of rivalry. The next conflict would not begin on beaches, it would begin in science. The failure of one invasion did not end human history, but it changed its direction. Years later, an old Allied veteran returns to Normandy. The beach is quiet. Kids run where bullets once flew. They did change it, just not the way anyone wanted. So when people talk about World War II like it ended in one clean moment, remember this: the real battle was never only about winning the war. Save this one. Then replay the map in your head. Different first move. Different Europe. He looked across the English Channel, then quietly said, "We almost changed the world. We just weren't given another chance." The wind carried his words across the sea. The Soviet flag flew over Berlin. And that image tells every future leader one thing: Moscow did not arrive as a guest. It arrived as the owner of the room. And that changes the Cold War before it even starts. In our history, America and the Soviet Union faced off as near equals in wrecked, exhausted Europe. Here, Washington looks across the Atlantic and sees a continent where Soviet influence stretches farther west than anyone expected before D-Day. The rivalry still comes. Of course it does, but now it begins with one side holding more territory, more leverage, and more fear in the room. The part people forget is how normal life keeps moving. Children still go to school, factories reopen streets, get cleared, bread gets baked. People still have to work, argue, fall in love, and pay rent. But the map on the classroom wall no longer matches the stories their parents tell at dinner. That gap matters. Kids grow up inside a new reality before they even learn what was lost. Then the race moves again, not back to beaches, into labs, rocket programs, nuclear research, jet aircraft computers. When one invasion fails, the next conflict changes shape. Nations stop measuring victory in miles of coastline and start measuring it in patents, launch sites, and uranium. This is the part that hits hardest. History did not need a century to bend, it needed one morning. One battlefield, one missed landing, one capital that fell to the wrong side at the wrong time. Years later, an old Allied veteran returns to Normandy. The beach is quiet. Kids run where bullets once flew. He looks across the channel and says they almost changed the world. That line lands because it is true. In the most brutal way, they did change it, just not the way anyone wanted. So when people talk about World War II like it ended in one clean moment, remember this: the real battle was never only about winning the war. It was about who got to shape the peace. And sometimes, the peace decides more than the fighting ever did. Save this one. Then replay the map in your head. Different first move, different Europe. D-Day could have failed by noon. That sounds wild, but it almost did. By sunrise on June 6, 1944, the whole plan was already wobbling. The sea was rough. The sky was ugly. Some landing craft hit the beach miles off target. Others sank before they even reached shore. And the men on those boats? They were not watching a history lesson. They were trying to stay alive long enough to step onto sand. People love to picture D-Day like a clean victory. The truth is messier. It was a giant bet made in terrible weather against fortified cliffs with thousands of moving parts that had to line up in the dark. If even a few key pieces fail, the whole thing starts collapsing. And that nearly happened on Omaha Beach. The worst nightmare showed up fast. The tide was wrong. The smoke was thick. The German defenses stayed alive longer than expected. Some soldiers jumped into chest-deep water with 80 pounds of gear on their backs and drowned before firing a shot. That part matters. It means one beach turns into a disaster that spreads. For hours, Omaha looked like that disaster. At Utah Beach, another mistake turned into a strange kind of luck. American troops landed farther south than planned, and instead of facing the strongest defenses head-on, they hit a weaker spot. Same operation, same day. Two completely different realities. That's the part people miss. D-Day was not one single event. It was dozens of near misses stacked on top of each other. Weather, timing, radio trouble, confused units, broken coordination, bad maps, hidden guns. Every piece could have pushed the invasion past the point of recovery. And yet, it kept moving. That's the real lesson. History does not move like a movie script. It moves like a half-broken machine that still runs because enough gears catch for one more second, one more order, one more landing, one more bridge held, one more commander refuses to quit. So when you look at Europe today, remember this. None of it was promised. The borders, the alliances, the freedom after 1945, none of that had to happen to a morning that could have gone the other way. That's why alternate history hits so hard. Not because it changes the past, because it exposes how thin the line was between our world and another one. One beach, one morning, one decision chain, that's all it took. And if D-Day could hang on that edge, then every inevitable moment in history deserves a second look.